The Galactic Coalition Academy sat on a moon that circled a dying star. It was the most famous military school in the known universe. Species from 100 different worlds sent their best young soldiers to train there. They came to learn how to fight, how to survive, and how to become the warriors their planets needed. The academy was run by instructor Vexithal. He was a Krellian, a species known for their 4 arms and their skin that looked like black glass. He stood 8 feet tall and had 4 yellow eyes that could see in complete darkness. He had trained soldiers for 60 years. He had seen cadets from every species pass through his halls. Some became legends, others became graves. This training cycle had 23 cadets. Most of them were from powerful species with natural weapons. There was Zinara, a Chitauri female with the body of a giant insect. Her eyes were made of thousands of tiny lenses, and she could see movement from miles away. There was Broctal, a Gorvian whose body was covered in stone-like plates. Plasma fire could not hurt him. There was Mirael, a Sylvani female who could read minds and hide her presence from any creature. And then there was Jake Collins. Jake was human. He was 26 years old with brown hair and brown eyes. He stood about 6 feet tall, which made him shorter than most of the other cadets. He had no claws, no armor, no venom, and no special powers. When he smiled, which was often, the other cadets wondered what he had to be happy about. Humans were new to the galaxy. They had only discovered faster-than-light travel about 90 years ago. 3 generations of humans had grown up knowing that aliens existed, but that was not very long in galactic terms. Most species did not think much of humans. They were soft. They were weak. They had no natural weapons at all. Many aliens wondered why the Coalition even bothered to include them in anything. Jake did not seem to mind what others thought. He went to his classes, did his training, and kept that smile on his face. His roommate was a Chitauri named Zelvok, who spent most of his time clicking his mouth parts in what passed for laughter among his kind. He found Jake amusing in the way one might find a small animal amusing. On the last day before the final examination, Instructor Vexthal called all the cadets to the main hall. The room was large enough to hold 1,000 soldiers, but with only 23 cadets, it felt empty. Their footsteps echoed on the metal floor as they lined up before their instructor. Vexthal looked at them with all 4 of his eyes. When he spoke, his voice was deep and rough, like rocks grinding together. "Your final examination begins tomorrow morning," he said. "You will be taken to Kethros 7. It is a Class 4 death world. Do you know what that means?" No one answered. They all knew. "It means," Vexthal continued, "that everything on that planet wants to kill you. The plants are poison, the water is acid, and the animals are the most dangerous predators in this sector of space." He began to walk slowly in front of the line of cadets. His 4 arms were folded behind his back. "You will be dropped on the surface with nothing. No weapons, no food, no water, no communication devices. You will have only your body and your training. Your mission is simple. Survive for 48 hours. A small sound came from somewhere in the line. It might have been fear. "The most dangerous creatures on Kethros 7 are called Shadowmanes," Vexthal said. "They are pack hunters. They have 6 legs, venomous fangs, and a mane of sharp spines. They are as smart as any of you, maybe smarter. They have never failed to kill their prey, not once in recorded history." He stopped walking and turned to face the cadets again. "Those of you who survive will graduate with the highest honors. Those of you who do not survive, well, we will send a nice message to your families." Jake raised his hand. Vexthal's 4 eyes moved to look at him. There was something in that look. Maybe pity, maybe amusement, maybe both. "Yes." "Cadet Collins?" "Sir, are we allowed to work together? To help each other?" Some of the other cadets made small noises. A few of them laughed quietly. The human wanted to make friends on a death world. How typical. How foolish. Vexthal did not laugh. He simply stared at Jake for a long moment before answering. You may try to work together if you wish, but I would not recommend it. On Kethros 7, resources will be scarce. When beings are hungry and scared, they do not think about friendship. They think about survival. Your fellow cadets may become just as dangerous as the wildlife. Jake nodded slowly, as if thinking about this. Thank you, sir. That night, while the other cadets tried to sleep or spent their time worrying, Jake sat in his small room and read. He had accessed the Academy's database and downloaded everything he could find about Kethros 7. He read about the poisonous plants and the acid rivers. He read about the flying predators and the burrowing hunters. But mostly he read about the shadow manes. His roommate Zelvok watched him from across the room. The Chitauri's many eyes reflected the light from Jake's screen. You are wasting your time, human, Zelvok said. Reading will not save you. Nothing will save you. You should just stay near where they drop you. Maybe they will find your body before the scavengers eat it all. Jake did not look up from his reading. Maybe, he said. You do not seem scared. I am a little scared, Jake admitted. But I am also curious. Curious about what? About how it feels to be eaten? Jake finally looked up. That smile was on his face again, but this time there was something different about it. Something that Zelvak could not quite understand. I found something interesting in the data about shadow manes, Jake said. Something that nobody else seems to have noticed. What could you possibly have found that the experts missed? Jake turned off his screen and lay back on his bed. He stared at the ceiling for a while before answering. They are pack animals, he said quietly. They live in family groups. They take care of their young for years before the young ones leave. They share food with each other. They mourn when one of them dies. Zelvok clicked his mouth parts. So what? They are still monsters. Maybe, Jake said. Or maybe they are just animals that nobody has tried to understand. He closed his eyes and went to sleep. Tomorrow would be a very interesting day. Across the academy, in rooms and halls and training grounds, other cadets prepared for what they believed would be the worst 2 days of their lives. They sharpened their natural weapons. They practiced their survival skills. They said prayers to whatever gods their species believed in. None of them thought about making friends with the monsters. But then again, none of them were human. The transport ship cut through the thick clouds of Kethros 7 like a knife through water. Inside the cargo hold, 23 cadets sat in rows of metal seats. Nobody spoke. The only sounds were the rumble of the engines and the breathing of scared young soldiers. Jake sat near the back of the ship. He looked at the faces of his fellow cadets. The Chitauri were clicking their mouthparts nervously. The Gorvians sat completely still, their stone faces impossible to read. The Silvani had their eyes closed, probably trying to calm their minds with meditation. Everyone was afraid. Jake could smell it in the air. Different species made different chemicals when they were scared, and right now, the cargo hold smelled like a factory of fear. The ship shook as it entered the lower atmosphere. Through the small windows, Jake could see the surface of Kethros 7 coming into view. It was a world of dark greens and deep purples. Forests covered most of the land, but these were not the gentle forests of Earth. These trees had bark the color of dried blood. Their branches twisted in strange shapes, reaching toward the sky like the fingers of dying men. A light turned red above the rear doors. The pilot's voice came through the speakers. 30 seconds to drop. Get ready. The cadets stood up and moved toward the doors. Jake noticed that nobody stood close to anyone else. Already, they were treating each other as potential threats rather than potential allies. The doors opened, and the heat hit them like a wall. The air of Kethros 7 was hot and wet and smelled like rotting flowers. Below them, about 20 feet down, was the floor of the jungle. Go! the pilot ordered. One by one, the cadets jumped. Some of them ran as soon as they hit the ground. Others took a moment to look around before choosing a direction. Zin-Ara, the Chitauri female, climbed straight up into the trees, her many legs gripping the bark easily. Broktal, the big Gorvian, simply started walking north, trusting his armor to protect him. Jake was the last one to jump. He landed softly on the ground and stood there for a moment, looking at the jungle around him. It was beautiful in a terrible way. Glowing mushrooms covered the ground in patches of green and blue light. Strange insects flew through the air, their wings making sounds like whispers. Somewhere in the distance, something screamed. It might have been an animal. It might have been a cadet. Jake tried not to think about it. He chose a direction and started walking. But unlike the other cadets, he did not try to hide. He did not move quietly or stick to the shadows. He walked at a normal pace, letting his feet break twigs and rustle leaves. He wanted to be noticed. The other cadets would have thought he was crazy. On a death world, you did not want predators to know where you were. That was basic survival training. But Jake was not thinking about survival training. He was thinking about something else entirely. He walked for 3 hours. The second sun of this system began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The jungle grew darker, and the glowing mushrooms grew brighter. More screams echoed in the distance. Jake counted them. By his guess, at least 5 cadets had already run into trouble. As the light faded, Jake found what he was looking for. Tracks. They were pressed deep into the soft ground, each one as big as his head. 6 toes on each foot with curved claws that had left grooves in the earth. The tracks were fresh, probably less than an hour old. And there were many of them, moving in the same direction. A pack. At least 5 individuals, maybe more. Shadow manes. Jake followed the tracks. He moved slowly now. Not because he was trying to hide, but because he wanted to give them time to notice him. He wanted them to know he was coming. He found their den as the last light disappeared from the sky. It was a cave at the base of an enormous tree, the entrance wide enough for 3 humans to walk through side by side. The smell coming from inside was strong, a mix of meat and musk and something wild. Jake stopped about 30 feet from the entrance. He sat down on the ground, crossed his legs, and placed his hands on his knees. Then he waited. 20 minutes passed. The jungle around him was full of sounds, insects and birds and things he could not identify. But from the cave, there was only silence. Then, a shape appeared in the darkness of the entrance. The shadow mane was bigger than Jake had expected. Its body was about the size of a small car, supported by 6 powerful legs. Its fur was dark gray, almost black, perfect for hiding in shadows. A mane of sharp spines ran from its head down its back to the tip of its long tail. And its eyes were gold, bright and intelligent, and fixed directly on Jake. The creature moved forward slowly, its body low to the ground, like a cat preparing to pounce. Behind it, 4 more shadow manes emerged from the den. They spread out, surrounding Jake in a half-circle. He was trapped against a wall of thick bushes with nowhere to run. Not that he planned to run. The lead shadow mane stopped about 5 feet away from Jake. Up close, he could see the details of its face, the scars from old fights, the dried blood around its mouth from a recent meal, the way its nostrils moved as it smelled him. Jake did not move. He did not make a sound. He controlled his breathing, keeping it slow and steady. He knew that predators could sense fear, could smell it in the sweat and hear it in the heartbeat. So he refused to be afraid. The shadow mane tilted its head, studying him. Jake could almost see the confusion in its golden eyes. Every instinct this creature had was telling it that this small, soft thing was food. But food ran. Food screamed. Food tried to fight or escape. This human did neither. Very slowly, Jake reached into his pocket. The shadow manes tensed, ready to attack at the first sign of a weapon. But Jake did not pull out a weapon. He pulled out a small piece of dried meat. Before the drop, each cadet had been given a tiny emergency ration, just a few bites of food in case they became desperate. Jake had hidden his piece in his pocket, saving it for this moment. He held the meat out on his flat palm, offering it to the lead shadow mane. Minutes passed. The creature stared at the meat, then at Jake, then back at the meat. The other shadow manes watched in silence, waiting to see what their leader would do. Finally, very carefully, the lead shadow mane lowered its head and took the meat from Jake's hand. Its teeth were as long as his fingers, its breath was hot on his skin, but it did not bite him. It simply took the offering and ate it. Jake smiled. "Hello," he said softly. "My name is Jake. I think we're going to be friends." The shadow mane stared at him with those golden eyes. It did not attack. It did not run away. It simply sat down in front of him and waited to see what this strange creature would do next. It was the beginning of something that would change the galaxy forever. By the middle of the first night, Jake had given them all names. The lead shadow mane was a female with a long scar across her left eye. He called her Luna because her golden eyes reminded him of the moon. Her mate was slightly larger, with fur so dark it seemed to absorb the light around him. Jake called him Duke. The three younger ones were their children, probably born in the last year or so. The biggest of the young ones became Scout, because he was always the first to investigate anything new. The middle one became Shadow, because she could disappear into darkness better than any of the others. And the smallest one, who seemed more curious than afraid of Jake, became Pip. The other cadets would have called him insane. Giving names to apex predators was something only a fool would do, but Jake knew something that most species in the galaxy did not understand. He knew that naming something was the first step toward forming a bond with it. Back on Earth, humans had spent thousands of years turning dangerous animals into friends. Wolves had become dogs. Wild cats had become house pets. Horses, which could kill a man with one kick, had become loyal companions that carried humans across continents. This ability to see a predator and think, "I want to be friends with that," was perhaps the strangest thing about humanity. It was also one of their greatest strengths. Jake did not try to sleep inside the den that first night. That would have been too much, too fast. Instead, he stayed at the edge of the pack's territory, close enough that they could see him, but far enough that he was not invading their space. He curled up against the roots of a large tree and closed his eyes. He slept better than he had in months. When morning came, the pack was awake and watching him. Luna sat at the entrance of the den, her golden eyes tracking his every movement. The young ones were more active, running and playing in the clearing in front of the cave. Pip kept looking in Jake's direction, his small tail twitching with curiosity. Jake stayed where he was. He did not approach. He simply sat and watched, letting them get used to his presence. Trust, he knew, could not be rushed. It had to be built slowly, one moment at a time. By noon, Scout had crept close enough to sniff his boots. Jake stayed perfectly still, letting the young shadow mane investigate. Scout circled him twice, sniffed his hands, and then returned to his siblings. It was progress. That afternoon, Jake faced a problem. He was hungry. The tiny piece of meat he had given to Luna was all the food he had brought, and there were no plants nearby that a human could safely eat. He would need to find food soon, or he would become too weak to survive. The pack was getting ready for something. Jake watched as they gathered near the den entrance, their bodies tense with energy. Luna made a series of low sounds, and the others responded with sounds of their own. It was a language, Jake realized, a way of communicating that was far more complex than simple animal noises. They were going hunting. Jake had a choice. He could stay here and try to find food on his own, or he could follow the pack and see what happened. The first option was safer. The second option was much more interesting. He followed them. The hunt was one of the most amazing things Jake had ever seen. The Shadowmanes moved through the jungle like ghosts, their 6 legs carrying them over fallen trees and through thick bushes without making a sound. Luna led them with subtle movements of her head and tail, directing each member of the pack to a specific position. They worked together perfectly, like parts of a single machine. Their prey was a Kethrian boar, a massive beast with 4 legs and tusks made of something harder than steel. It was bigger than the Shadowmanes, probably weighing twice as much as Duke. Its small eyes were red with anger, and when it saw the predators surrounding it, it let out a roar that shook the trees. The boar was strong, it was dangerous, but it was alone. The Shadowmanes did not attack directly. They circled. They feinted. They took turns darting in and retreating. The boar spun and charged, but every time it committed to one direction, another Shadowmane was there to slash at its sides. Slowly, the great beast began to tire. Its movements became slower. Its roars became weaker. When the boar finally fell, it was Duke who made the killing bite, his jaws closing around the beast's throat. The creature kicked twice and then lay still. The pack began to eat. Luna went first, as was her right as the leader. Then Duke, then the young ones. Jake stayed back, watching from a safe distance. He did not expect to be included. He was not part of the pack, not yet. But then something unexpected happened. Luna tore off a large chunk of meat from the boar's side. She carried it in her mouth, away from the main carcass, and dropped it on the ground about 10 feet from where Jake was standing. Then she looked at him and waited. Jake understood. In wolf packs on Earth, sharing food was one of the most important social acts. When a pack member gave food to another, it meant acceptance. It meant you are one of us. He walked forward slowly and picked up the meat. It was raw and bloody and still warm. He raised it to his mouth and took a bite. It was not good. It was not bad either. It was survival. Luna made a sound, something between a grunt and a purr. Then she returned to the rest of the pack, leaving Jake to eat his share in peace. That night, everything changed. When the pack returned to their den, Pip broke away from his siblings and trotted over to Jake. The young Shadowmane circled him once, then lay down against his leg, pressing his warm body against the human's side. Jake froze. He had not expected this. He had hoped for tolerance, maybe acceptance over time. But this was trust. This was a wild predator choosing to be vulnerable next to him. Slowly, carefully, Jake reached down and placed his hand on Pip's side. The young Shadowmane's fur was softer than he expected, the spines along his back still small and flexible. Pip made a small chirping sound and pressed closer. One by one, the other young Shadowmanes joined them. Scout curled up on Jake's other side. Shadow lay down at his feet. Even Duke came over and sniffed Jake's hair before lying down nearby. Only Luna stayed apart, watching from the entrance of the den, but Jake could see something in her golden eyes that had not been there before. It might have been respect. It might have been wonder. It might have been the beginning of something much bigger than either of them understood. Jake fell asleep surrounded by warmth. For the first time since he had arrived on this death world, he felt safe. Somewhere in the distant jungle, another cadet screamed. The Shadowmane's ears twitched at the sound, but they did not move. They had their human now. They did not need to hunt tonight. They had found something much more interesting than prey. 40 hours into the examination, Instructor Vexthal stood in the monitoring room aboard the Academy ship. His 4 eyes moved between different screens, each one showing data from a different cadet's tracking device. Of the 23 cadets who had been dropped on Kethros 7, only 8 signals remained active. The others had either pressed their emergency buttons to be rescued, or their signals had simply stopped. Stopped usually meant dead. "Sir," one of the monitoring officers said, "there is something strange happening with Cadet Collins." Vexthal turned to look at the human's data. The tracking device showed his heart rate, his body temperature, his location, and his movement patterns. Everything looked normal. Actually, everything looked better than normal. The human's vital signs were calmer than they had any right to be for someone on a death world. "What is strange about it?" Vexthal asked. "His location, sir. He has not moved in over 6 hours. And according to our sensors, he is surrounded by large life forms, at least 5 of them, all within 20 feet of his position." Vexthal's 4 eyes blinked one after another, which among his species was a sign of confusion. "Shadowmanes?" "Yes, sir. The readings match Shadowmane biology exactly." "Then why is he still alive?" The officer had no answer for that. Down on the surface of Kethros 7, Jake was having a wonderful morning. He woke up slowly, his body warm despite the cool air. Pip was still pressed against his chest, making small sounds in his sleep that were almost like snoring. Scout and Shadow were nearby, their bodies curled together in a ball of gray fur. Duke was awake, watching the jungle around them with careful eyes. And Luna was grooming herself near the den entrance, her long tongue cleaning the fur on her front legs. Jake sat up carefully, trying not to disturb Pip. The young Shadowmane opened one golden eye, looked at him, and then closed it again, clearly not ready to wake up yet. Over the past day, Jake had learned a lot about the pack. He had learned their sounds, the different growls and chirps and purrs that made up their language. He had learned their body movements, the way they used their tails and ears to communicate things that sounds could not. He had learned their personalities. Luna was the leader, calm and wise. Duke was the protector, always alert for danger. Scout was brave and curious. Shadow was quiet and careful. And Pip, sweet little Pip, was the baby of the family, always wanting attention and affection. In return, Jake had shown them things about himself. He had shown them that his hands could do things their paws could not, like removing the small bugs that lived in their fur and bothered them constantly. He had shown them that his eyes were different from theirs, better at seeing details, but worse at seeing in the dark. He had shown them that he was weak in body but strong in other ways. They had accepted him, not as prey, not as a threat, but as something new, something useful, something worth keeping around. The peace of the morning was broken by a sound from the jungle. Voices, alien voices, speaking in the common language of the coalition. Jake stood up, and immediately Luna was at his side. The big female had become protective of him over the past day, often staying close enough to touch. She had lost a member of her pack 2 seasons ago, another female taken by a disease that swept through the jungle. Jake sometimes wondered if she saw him as a replacement, a strange new creature to care for and protect. They moved through the trees together, Jake walking and Luna padding silently beside him. The voices grew louder as they got closer, and then Jake heard something that made his blood run cold. Screaming. Not the screaming of someone who was scared, the screaming of someone who was about to die. They found them in a small clearing about 100 yards from the den. 2 cadets, Zinara the Chitari and a massive Gorvian named Thrak, were backed against a cliff wall. In front of them, 2 young Shadowmanes were circling, their bodies low and ready to attack. These Shadowmanes were not from Luna's pack. They were smaller, thinner, clearly from a different family group. They were also hungrier. Jake could see their ribs through their fur. Times had been hard for them. Zinara saw Jake first. Her compound eyes widened when she noticed Luna standing beside him. "Human," she clicked, her voice full of fear. "Human, please help us. Do something." The two young Shadowmanes had noticed Jake now. They turned to look at him, confused by the appearance of another creature. Then they saw Luna, and their bodies immediately changed. Their ears went flat against their heads. Their tails dropped low. Their aggressive postures became submissive in an instant. Luna was bigger than them. Luna was older, stronger, more experienced. And Luna was staring at them with eyes that promised pain if they did not behave. Jake stepped forward. He made a sound, a sharp barking noise that he had heard Luna use when she wanted the young ones to stop doing something. It was not a perfect imitation, but it was close enough. The two strange Shadowmanes looked at him, then at Luna, then back at him. They were confused. This soft creature was giving them orders like he was a pack leader, but Luna was supporting him, standing behind him like she accepted his authority. "Go," Jake said, pointing away from the cadets. "Leave. Now." He did not know if they understood his words, but they understood his tone. They understood Luna's growl that followed, and they understood that this was not a fight they wanted. The two young Shadowmanes turned and disappeared into the jungle, moving fast. Within seconds, they were gone. Zinara and Thrak stared at Jake. Their expressions were difficult to read, alien faces with alien features, but Jake thought he saw something like shock in their eyes. Maybe even awe. "How?" Thrak managed to say. His voice was like rocks grinding together. "How did you do that?" Jake looked at Luna, who had moved to stand beside him again. He reached out and placed his hand on her head between her ears, in the spot where she liked to be scratched. She leaned into his touch, her golden eyes closing in pleasure. "Humans are good with animals," Jake said simply. For a long moment, no one spoke. Zinara's many eyes moved between Jake and the Shadowmane, clearly trying to understand what she was seeing. Thrak just stood there with his stone mouth hanging open. Finally, Zinara broke the silence. "May we stay with you, human, until the extraction ship comes?" Jake looked at Luna. The big female looked back at him, and something passed between them. An understanding, a question and an answer that needed no words. "You can stay," Jake said. "But you need to follow some rules. Do not make sudden movements. Do not show fear. Do not run. No matter what happens. And most importantly, do not hurt any of them. They are my friends." Zinara and Thrak nodded quickly, willing to agree to anything that would keep them alive. Jake led them back to the den. Behind him, Luna walked like a shadow, her golden eyes watching the new arrivals with careful interest. The human had saved 2 lives today. 2 cadets who would have been food were now under the protection of the most dangerous predators on the planet. And somewhere in space, Instructor Vexthal watched his monitors and wondered what exactly was happening on Kethros 7. The extraction shuttle landed exactly at hour 48. Its engines kicked up dust and leaves as it settled in a clearing about half a mile from the den. Instructor Vexthal himself came down the ramp, followed by a team of armed soldiers. He had not planned to do the extraction personally, but the reports he had received about the human cadet were too strange to believe. He needed to see with his own eyes. The tracking device led them through the jungle toward Jake's location. The soldiers moved carefully, weapons raised, eyes scanning the shadows for threats. They had heard the stories about this place. They knew what lived here. They found the human in a clearing near a massive tree, and what they found made every single one of them stop and stare. Jake Collins sat on a fallen log, looking relaxed and happy. Around him, arranged like guards around a king, were 5 Shadowmanes. The largest female lay at his feet, her golden eyes watching the approaching soldiers with dangerous interest. The big male stood nearby, his body tense and ready. 3 younger ones were playing some kind of game that involved chasing each other in circles, and on Jake's lap, curled up like a house cat, was the smallest Shadowmane. The human was scratching behind its ears, and the deadly predator was making a sound that could only be described as purring. Two other cadets stood nearby, the Chitauri Zinara and the Gorvian Thrak. They looked tired and dirty, but they were alive. They were watching Jake with expressions of wonder, like they could not quite believe what they had witnessed over the past 8 hours. Instructor Vexthal walked forward slowly. The big female Shadowmane raised her head and growled, a low warning sound that made the soldiers behind him take a step back. But Jake placed a hand on her head and made a soft sound, and she settled down again, though her eyes never left the Krellian. "Cadet Collins," Vexthal said, his voice carefully controlled. "What have you done?" Jake looked up at his instructor with that easy smile. "I survived, sir. Just like you asked. You were supposed to hide, to run, to fight if you had to. Not this." He gestured at the lounging predators. "Not whatever this is." "You said no weapons, sir. You never said anything about making friends." The Shadowmane on Jake's lap opened one eye, looked at Vexthal, decided he was not interesting, and went back to sleep. The instructor stared at it for a long moment. "This is impossible," he said. "Shadowmanes are apex predators. They do not make friends. They do not have companions. They have prey, and they have enemies, and that is all." "With respect, sir," Jake said, his voice gentle but firm. "That is where you are wrong. Every species has the ability to form bonds. Every creature wants connection, wants family, wants to belong. The Shadowmanes are not monsters. They are animals, complex and intelligent animals with social structures and communication and emotions. They have just never met anyone who tried to understand them before." He stood up, the small Shadowmane grumbling in protest before jumping down from his lap. The big female rose with him, standing at his side like a faithful dog. "Humans are not the strongest species in the galaxy," Jake continued. "We are not the fastest or the toughest or the smartest, but we have one thing that most species do not. We have the ability to look at something dangerous and think, how can I make that my friend? We have been doing it for thousands of years. Wolves became dogs. Wild horses became partners. Eagles became hunting companions. It is what humans do. It is who we are." Vexthal was silent for a long moment. His 4 eyes moved from Jake to the Shadowmanes, to the 2 cadets standing nearby and back again. "Instructor," Zinara spoke up, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "I would have died without Cadet Collins. We both would have. He commanded wild Shadowmanes, and they obeyed him. They protected us because he asked them to. I have never seen anything like it in my life." The big female Shadowmane chose that moment to walk forward and sniff at Vexthal. The instructor stood perfectly still as the massive predator circled him once, her nose twitching. Then she made a huffing sound, apparently decided he was harmless, and returned to Jake's side. "The extraction ship has room for the surviving cadets," Vexthal said slowly. "It does not have room for 5 Shadowmanes." Jake's smile faded. He looked at Luna, at Duke, at Scout and Shadow, and little Pip. They looked back at him with their golden eyes, not understanding the words, but understanding the emotion behind them. "I am not leaving them," Jake said quietly. "Cadet Collins, they are wild animals, apex predators. You cannot simply take them with you like pets. They are not pets. They are family." The word hung in the air between them. Family. It was a word that meant something different to every species, but every species understood its weight, its importance. Luna pressed against Jake's leg and he rested his hand on her head. Pip climbed up and tried to reach his arms, making small chirping sounds until Jake picked him up. The young Shadowmane settled against his chest, perfectly content. Vexthal looked at this scene. This impossible scene of a human holding a deadly predator like a baby, and he made a decision. "There is a cargo hold on the ship," he said. "It will not be comfortable, but it will hold them for the journey back to the academy. After that, it will be for others to decide what happens. Jake's smile returned, brighter than ever. Thank you, sir. The journey back to the academy was unlike anything the Coalition had ever seen. A human walking through the halls of a military school surrounded by 5 of the most dangerous predators in the sector. Soldiers and cadets pressed against walls to let them pass. Officers stared with their mouths hanging open. A Sylvani fainted. Within a day, the story had spread across the academy. Within a week, it had reached other worlds. Within a month, every species in the Galactic Coalition knew the name Jake Collins, the human who had tamed shadow manes, the cadet who had turned apex predators into companions. Years passed. Jake established the first interstellar animal behavior research center, a place where humans could study alien wildlife and find ways to coexist with it. The shadow manes he had befriended became the foundation of a breeding program, their descendants growing gentler with each generation. Other humans followed in Jake's footsteps. They went to dangerous worlds and found ways to connect with creatures that other species could only fear. It became known throughout the galaxy that if you wanted something studied, you hired a Sylvani. If you wanted something fought, you hired a Krellian. But if you wanted something understood, something befriended, something turned from a threat into an ally, you hired a human, because humans did not just survive. They made friends. Many years later, an elderly Jake sat in a garden on a research station orbiting Earth. Around him played the great-grandchildren of Luna and Duke, smaller and gentler than their ancestors, beloved by visitors from across the galaxy. He often thought about that night on Kethros 7, when a young Shadowmane had first curled up against him and decided to trust. It had been such a small moment, such a simple choice. But it had changed everything. That was the power of humans. Not strength, not speed, not technology. Just the ability to reach out to something wild and say, "Let us be friends." And somehow, against all odds, make it happen